everybody, and welcome to another review. This is one I've sort of been saying I would do for a long time, and I decided that in honor of the fact that this book is releasing in paperback on May 6th, so this coming Tuesday, yeah, I just checked the date, I'm finally going to review it, even though it sort of breaks my rule of reviewing series before they complete. But in this case, I think it's okay, because this series literally just started this past year. And that book is, of course, The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. I have repped this numerous times by saying it was on my top 13 of 2013, that Paige Mahoney, who is our protagonist, was my favorite female protagonist of 2013 that I read, and just, guys, I love this book. Let me tell you a little story about kind of how I found it. Samantha Shannon, in case you're unaware, this is her debut novel, and it is the start of a series. And so I found this book in a really odd way, and I'm fairly certain it was the internet. I can't even 100% remember, but I remember seeing an article headline that essentially said, Bone Season, New Harry Potter, like, question mark. And I was like, what? Little rant moment. I hate taglines like that. I hate that we assume that nothing is original anymore. It's a new dystopia? Oh, it's clearly the next Hunger Games. It's a new multi-book fantasy series by a British author whose first-time novel this is? Oh, it's the next Harry Potter. Yes, Samantha Shannon is a first-time female British writer, and it's taking place in Britain. And this is going to be I believe a 7-book series. That is where your comparison to Harry Potter ends. And no, this is not like Hunger Games either, so let's get that out of the way. So I found the article, and they were talking about it only because today, Morning Today had picked this as their first book for their essentially book club they were trying to start. And I saw it on the shelf. And what I usually do when I'm looking at a book about which I know really nothing, and I'm just kind of looking for something to read. This was kind of back before I discovered BookTube and I didn't have a massive TBR shelf. So I looked at it, I opened it up and read the inside flap, and I read the first couple pages, and I went, yeah, I want this book. I went ahead, took a leap of faith, and bought this. Oh my god, guys, was my faith rewarded. So let's kind of get down to this. The Bone Season is a urban paranormal fantasy dystopia book series. Yes. Samantha Shannon herself, I think on her blog, has actually said that one of the most difficult things about The Bone Season and kind of getting it out, making it a book, was actually trying to classify it into a genre. So as much as I just said it's all those like different fantasy terms, it's not even shelved in science fiction fantasy. It's shelved in fiction lit. So this is a much more kind of literary fiction take on those different subgenres than anything else. And trust me, I really appreciate that. This takes place in an alternate universe, future London, the year's 2059, and essentially, Paige is what it's called as a clairvoyant. There's all these different orders and levels of clairvoyance. I'm going to get into that in a second, but Paige is what's known as a dreamwalker. She's an extremely rare clairvoyant, where essentially she can break into your mind via her own mind and mess around with stuff in your head, learn your secrets, find out all sorts of things. Essentially, she's like a female Professor X. It's pretty damn cool, I'm not gonna lie. She's essentially illegal for even being alive, which I thought was a really cool aspect of that we already get, okay, she's accustomed to danger because A, she knows she's just illegal for even existing, B, she's illegal especially for existing as a dreamwalker, and C, she then works for the criminal underground in this Scion-controlled London. Scion is basically the dystopian regime that has taken over, and it's the name I've given to this series. I just call this new series the Scion Chronicles because I don't think it has a name, and to me that just works. I think that's a cool title for a series. These are your Orwellian Big Brother. So Paige works for the criminal underground in this Scion-controlled London, and she works for a syndicate, which is essentially an organized gang, and the syndicate leader is a guy by the name of Jax. Fun fact, Samantha Shannon has very often said that she clearly imagines Benedict Cumberbatch in the role of Jackson, so like on my second or third reread, all I was imagining was Benedict Cumberbatch in this role, and it was total perfection. But just to shake things up into the plot, Paige ends up getting captured in London and sent off to what used to be essentially Oxford. It's called Sheol, and I'm really hoping I pronounced that right. Maybe it's Sheol. She's sent here, and she realizes that essentially Scion doesn't really control everything, because Scion themselves are sort of being manipulated and controlled by the very race of otherworldly creatures. We're never really given a 100% idea as to what they are. I'm assuming this is going to be more revealed throughout the series. They're called the Rephaim. Of course, I saw that and my mind sort of went to some kind of angelic inspired or angelic like creature, but not in the like, oh, we're all good and we're angels. More like the terrifying angels of like the Old Testament that would come down and like smite you on God's whim. Yeah, that's sort of what I was getting at, but hey, I could be totally off base on that. But the Rephaim are these ancient otherworldly creatures who have essentially been controlling Scion, who've then been controlling everybody else, and Paige is now in this, for lack of a better word, concentration camp where she's branded with a number and said, this is your number, you're going to be put under a Rephaim's care and they're going to train you because you need to go out and fight these creatures that have been attacking Sheol, that word's gonna drive me crazy, that have been attacking this camp, and so we need you to defend the camp, and we don't mind wasting your lives because you don't mean anything to us, and we will just go through another bone season, hence the title, in order to just get more people. So Paige is actually picked by our other really big character whose name is Warden. What I really like about this is Warden is not in charge. He's definitely very much on the upper rungs of the hierarchy in the Rephaim society, but it's only because he's the consort of the woman who's in charge. Yeah, let's take a moment and just enjoy the fact that a woman's in charge. She's totally cray, but she's in charge. And so the Warden is basically the leader's consort, and he takes Paige under her number only. And this is sort of a big deal, as Paige is frequently told she's so lucky the Warden picked her. Of course, she doesn't see anything lucky about this because she's like, I'm a freaking slave, what's lucky about that? But they make a big deal saying the Warden has never picked a human. He's never picked a clairvoyant. He's never chosen someone to train or to take under his wing. So it's a really big deal, and she's given these like really nice accommodations, and she's kind of actually given a lot more leeway than maybe some of the other slaves, but she never loses sight of the fact that she's a slave. It's always very clear to her that she's his prisoner, that she's a slave. So the rest of the book is essentially spent in 3 different aspects. One, you have Paige being trained in her power, in her clairvoyance by the Warden. He is trying to make her stronger, more powerful. He's basically telling her, you are way stronger than you think you are. I'm going to train you to make you that good. Secondly, she's constantly trying to figure out ways to leave and escape. She desperately wants to leave and get back to Scion London because obviously, I mean, as lousy as Scion London was, she did have family, she had a father, and she's in essentially a slave camp. Why would you want to stay in a slave camp? So I'm totally cool with her trying to escape. The third thing, and this was something I also became really intrigued in and which I love that Samantha Shannon developed, was we learn something happened in Sheol with a different one of the bone seasons, and the Rephaim are still sort of recovering from it. Essentially, and this isn't really a spoiler, fairly certain it isn't, we learned there was an attempted rebellion in Sheol. And obviously it was attempted, it didn't succeed. But there's obviously still repercussions being felt from this. And we don't really know how long ago it was, and we don't exactly know whom was involved. That's stuff that gets revealed through the book. And what's really amazing is how all 3 of those different elements, the training, the trying to escape, and learning about this rebellion, all converge by the end of the book. And I was just like, whoa! Okay, this is book 1 of a 7-book series. Okay, this plot must be massive, which excites me. I love really massive plots. I love really intricate and complex plots, and this had all of that in spades. So if you're telling me I'm getting 6 more books like this, praise be. Is it October 21st? Can I have the mime order? So let's sort of talk about characters. Our main protagonist, Paige, is around 19 years old, if I'm recalling her age correctly. I have a hard time remembering people's ages at times in books. I always over or underestimate their ages like really badly. So I'm going with 19 and I'm praying I'm right. And as I said, she is a dreamwalker. She breaks into people's minds. She works for a crime lord named Jackson. She lives at home with her father, who has no idea about what she does. In fact, he doesn't even know she's clairvoyant. But she is spunky. And by spunky, I mean she is tough, but she has a lot of flaws, and they're good flaws. It's not flaws that make me sit there and go, oh my god, like this is an obvious character flaw, why are we not addressing it? No, these are flaws which make her human. They make her way more empathetic and personable, and it makes her a much easier protagonist to follow. This is in first person. It is strictly in Paige's perspective. And I have made numerous marks saying I am not a huge fan of really limited perspectives. That was one of my biggest gripes when I read The Hunger Games, was that I didn't like the books because I wasn't interested in what Katniss was experiencing. I was more interested in the world around her. What was happening with the game makers? What was happening with President Snow? I wanted to know more of that intrigue. And because Katniss wasn't in any of that, I didn't get any of that, which was really frustrating. The beauty of this book is that Paige is involved in all of the things that I'm fascinated with in the book. So I didn't sit there and go, God, I really wish I knew what was going on here, but Paige isn't there. And it was like, no, I want to know about this mystery and I want to uncover it with Paige. No, I want to know if she's going to be able to escape, so I want to be there with Paige while she tries to escape. And then at the same time, I want to see her grow in her power, and I'm here with her while she grows in her power. That's just stuff I find really cool and I really, really like, and I was really pleased that our protagonist was involved in all of those same things. The other big character that you really have to work with is the Warden. He's a very mysterious character for basically the entirety of the book. We don't know much about him, and he is revealed over the course of the entire novel. So you spend the entire novel getting to know this guy. I really like that. It didn't feel sudden, it didn't feel rushed, it was really well paced. And he ends up being a really interesting character. He reminds me very much of Mr. Rochester from Jane Eyre. And I say that very deliberately because actually the epigraph at the start of this book is by Charlotte Bronte, who was the author of Jane Eyre. And the relationship that eventually develops between Warden and Paige very much reminded me of Rochester and Jane. And the most obvious thing being that you have a male character who, in comparison to his female counterpart, is significantly older, and you have this sort of professor-student or student-teacher relationship that grows beyond that in a way that puts them on more equal footing. And for me, that was really, really great. I actually am a huge fan of relationships like that, and if you're a big fan of Jane Eyre, you're gonna love the relationship that develops between Warden and Paige, because they obviously spend so much time together in so much close proximity, and watching that relationship was, to me, just sort of fascinating. It's rare that I say that. So yes, the other big thing I'm gonna talk about here is the world building. This is probably, for me, the best part of the Bone season in that it is so wildly detailed. I mean, so detailed. When you get the book, first of all, let's just appreciate that when you open it, you get this symbol, the symbol for Scion London. It's taken from an African tribe, I believe, and it's actually an anchor, which was a symbol of fear or something like that, which I thought was cool. And actually, when you take the underjacket off, you get the same symbol that's on the cover. It's the symbol from the 7 Dials, in case you're not aware, and the 7 Dials is where all the crime syndicates hang out. But you open the book and you get the epigraph from Charlotte Bronte, and then you open it up and you get this complete breakdown of the 7 orders of clairvoyance. This is really important because you need it. You really need this breakdown. And actually, if you turn to the page after it, you also get a map of Shoal. There's no map of London because I think, like everybody, Ms. Shannon assumes you kind of can figure out what London looks like. And we're not in there for that long. We spend more time in Shoal, so it's important to get that map. But that breakdown of the 7 Orders of Clairvoyance is really the more important because this ties into the learning curve of the novel. The learning curve is essentially the rate at which the reader is able to enter, be introduced to, adjust to, and acclimate themselves to the fictional world in which they're entering. And this is really big in any form of fantasy, science fiction, dystopia fiction, because there is a learning curve. You have to be able to jump into the book and you have to be able to read it at a rate where you're not really struggling. For example, the Song of Ice and Fire series by George R. Martin has a really steep learning curve. You're pretty much plunged headfirst into the deep end and you're expected to basically sink or swim. He's pretty tough. You just kind of have to roll with it, and there's not too much help given to you along the way. The learning curve of the Bone season is similarly pretty steep. This is going to be a tougher novel than something like, say, The Hunger Games or Divergent. Those have a much easier learning curve. The Bone season is somewhere in between The Hunger Games and The Song of Ice and Fire. On the plus side, and actually this was something I heard as a criticism of the novel, but for me I actually didn't mind the passage just by the way it was written. There's a small, like, almost info dump-like portion of the beginning where you really get a breakdown of how this world is structured. This is prior to Shoal, so I'm talking about Scion London. And it's really helpful and it's really useful. But at the same time, the learning curve is pretty steep. And the main part of that really comes from the terminology. There's a lot of in-world terminology and in-world colloquialisms and slang terms that you really need to pick up on. The beautiful thing is you do have that breakdown in the front, and there's also a glossary in the back for any slang terms you're unsure of. The slang is actually really cool. It was developed, I believe, out of, I want to say 19th century British terms. And for me, it adds to the color and the flavor of the novel. This is a book that spends a really good amount of time immersing you in its world. And that is really crucial for a first book because you need to acclimate yourself to the world you're going to be in if you're going to be following it for 6 more books. But at the same time, this has a plot, and boy does that plot move. It doesn't feel like it's just sitting there to set you up for more books. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that series writers can make, is just leave everything for the second book, and the first book is just sort of like, okay, as a result. And as I said, if you're telling me that this is book 1, and I have 6 more books to go that are like this is a massive plot that she's building. This is going to be an epic level story, and I'm so excited to see where it goes because it does leave off kind of on a cliffhanger. A bunch of the miniature plots have been wrapped up, but there's sort of this big overhanging question mark that's in there, and it's a good one. It's one that leaves me sitting here basically like freaking out, ready for October 21st because I need the mime order. Okay, I've sort of been fawning over this thing, I think, enough for now, but I'll say this because I know some people get wary when someone tells them it's a book that's got a fairly steep learning curve. Let me just say this, as much as I said I hate comparisons, let me try and find a way to say whose taste this will be in. So, if you like kind of urban, paranormal fantasy a la the worlds of the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy by Laini Taylor, or even at times the Mortal Instruments series / Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare, you should read this book. If you like dystopian fiction a la like George Orwell and Aldous Huxley, you should read this book. If you like character relationship dynamics like Mr. Rochester and Jane from Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, as well as some of the gothic creepiness of that book and Wuthering Heights, you should read this book. Okay, I think I'm like totally out of any other way I could best get people to try and read this book. Please, I would love for people to go and read this book because it's so phenomenal that I get in a book hangover every time I read it, and I've read it like 4 times. Hasn't even been out for a year and I've read this 4 times. So yes, The Bone Season, Samantha Shannon. The paperback is coming out May 6th. That is this Tuesday. You should all go run and pick it up. But that is all for me right now, so until next time, you guys, cheers.